I saw the chest explode on the nearest figure, a tall, emaciated creature with bloody red eyes. The film of blood seemed about to overflow and fall down his face as tears, but it never did. The eyes of the others looked the same, and in the beams of the overly bright LED flashlights, they almost seemed to glow and shimmer. I could see the vague silhouette of pupils beneath the blood. Though this happened years ago, I still remember the way they looked. The superhuman speed of these abominations. The flakes that fell off their crisp, destroyed skin in the pale moonlight, and the much brighter lights of our flashlight beams. Their emaciated, scorched bodies moved in a blur, surrounding and rushing us. The gunshots broke the stillness of the woods, and everything seemed to devolve into chaos within seconds. In the moment, I felt a wave of calmness come over me. I could see us being surrounded, see the rounds taking down the first line of blackened creatures, but I felt at peace. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. I aimed the shotgun again and again at center mass, blowing apart their chest and stomachs with shotgun slugs. And none of them rose. Blue blood spurted from their wounds. It had the hue of a dark Arctic ocean, frozen and endless. The dark blue fluid soaked into their burnt skin as they lay on the ground, gasping and dying, clenching and unclenching their twisted fingers with endless, gurgling screams. But we were 5 against many, hopelessly outnumbered. Whatever these things were, they seemed to have no fear. They kept coming, running at us, and I had to reload. With practice ease, my fingers yanked slugs from my bulging pockets, slamming them into the shotgun. Most of the other rangers had also run out of ammo. I saw a couple dozen blackened bodies laying across the trail and the forest. Some of them dead, others dying or seizing, kicking their strangely long and crooked feet again and again, like a child throwing a tantrum. Soon, they had started to reach us, and I saw them grab Antonio, heaving his massive body across the trail and throwing him to the ground. Others saw the opportunity and leapt towards him, their fangs gleaming in the artificial light. They began to bite at his face and neck. "Get away from him!" I screamed, slamming the last slug into the gun and running forwards. I began firing, but in my excitement, the first shot went high and blew apart a tree, sending chunks of bark and splinters in every direction. The next one hit the creature that bent over Antonio's neck, entering the back of its head and continuing down towards the forest floor. The shot missed Antonio himself by only a foot or so, but it had to be done. I had no better angle to fire from at the time. The creature fell over Antonio, but another one bent over his chest, and I saw, with horror, that he had bitten a chunk from Antonio's shoulder and now sucked out the spurting blood, sighing in pleasure and grinning. It looked up at me for a moment, blood staining its teeth red, its liquid eyes emanating hatred and hunger towards me. I shot it in the neck, and the blue blood of its body mixed with the red of its feast, giving a technicolor hue to the life fluids that leaked out of its broken, dying body. I kicked the creatures off of Antonio. They felt surprisingly light, like lifting the body of a child. Though they were taller than any man in our group, their emaciated bodies didn't seem to have an ounce of fat, as if they had been starved for weeks and then released to feed on whatever they found. The last ranger in our group, a new and very young-looking man by the name of Roger, ran past, shooting at something in the forest, hollering and laughing. I registered it for a moment, then a scream took me back to the present. Dean shrieked at me, "Behind you!" I spun, finding 3 more of the creatures standing there, blue saliva foaming from their mouths. Their sharp teeth gnashed at the air, tasting the meat that stood in front of them before it had even entered their mouth. And they rushed at me at once. I fired 3 times and hit 2 of them in the head. The 3rd shot went high, and then the creature was on me, knocking me to the ground. I knew I had no more shells in my shotgun by this point, having fired all 6 rounds. I held onto the shotgun and tried to use it as a weapon. Turning it sideways, I used it like a club, forcing it against the creature's thin, long neck. Its head came down towards my face, snapping and breathing rotten fumes into my mouth. I tasted its saliva as it dripped down onto my lips. A taste like rancid meat and chemicals. I spat, pushing with all my strength, but it continued to get closer until its face and its many sharp fangs stood only a fraction of an inch from my own. We looked into each other's eyes like infatuated lovers, but I knew the only thing this creature loved in me was my flesh, which it would rip apart as I lay there, screaming and pleading for death. As my strength failed, and the creature's face lunged forward, opening its maw wide, its head exploded, sending a waterfall of cerulean blood pouring down over my mouth and nose. I felt pieces of its skin stuck to mine, and soon I held only a lifeless corpse by the neck with my shotgun. Spitting and retching, I rolled to my side, wiping my eyes with my jacket sleeve. I looked up and saw Dean standing there, a black 30-06 Remington in his hands. He smiled at me and gave me his hand. "God damn," I said, spitting on the ground and nearly throwing up as I tasted the blood at the back of my throat. "I guess you could have waited longer, Dean." He shrugged. "They're gone," he said, showing me the bodies of a few dozen blackened monstrosities laying on the ground. "The rest of them fled into the woods. I doubt that's the last we will see of them, though. And I would have shot it sooner, but Allie had one on her back. Literally. It jumped on her like it wanted a piggyback ride, and it bit onto her shoulder and sucked some of her blood. I took that one out, and yours, as quickly as I could. Then I remembered Antonio. "Where's Antonio?" I asked, goosebumps rising on my skin. "Is he?" "He's still alive," Dean said, his smile fading. He pointed to Antonio on the ground. Allie stood by his side, applying pressure to the gaping wound on his shoulder. I could see pieces of his bone through it. His right ear was gone, and he had blood pouring from a scalp wound. He breathed fast, raising and lowering his arms and calling out for his wife. Allie calmed him. "We're going to get you help," she said. "You're going to be okay. It doesn't look like any major blood vessels got severed, thank God." "How the hell are we supposed to get him out of here?" I asked. I tried my walkie-talkie, remembering Dean's story about how his had failed at the critical moment when he needed help. But this time, it worked. I heard the voice of a female ranger come through, and it sounded like an angel to me in that time of desperation. "Antonio Brown, the head ranger, is seriously injured," I said. "We need an immediate medical evac. We are on the Loggerhead Trail, right before it meets the Angel Trace Mountain Circuit." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry to tell you, but there is nowhere to land any sort of helicopter in that area. I think you already knew that, though. The best chance to get him out of there quickly is with an ATV with an attached trailer. But that's going to be a bumpy ride. Is he critically injured, do you think? Or..." She said. "Look, I'm not a doctor," I said, "but he has blood all over him. He's missing an ear and a piece of his shoulder, and he has a massive scalp laceration. Allie doesn't seem to think he has any arteries severed, but she isn't exactly a doctor either." "And what about everyone else?" "I've already called in the paramedics. They're on their way. Another ranger is setting up the ATV attachment with blankets for Antonio, so we can pull him out of there to safety. Are there any other injuries?" I looked at Allie, with her bleeding shoulder. I had a few scrapes and cuts on me, but considering the circumstances, I considered those nothing at all. Dean looked totally fine, as if he had just stepped out of the ranger station to go on a moonlit stroll. Then I looked around, lowering the walkie-talkie suddenly. "Where's the new guy?" I asked loudly. They all turned to me, even Antonio. We had 5 people. We had Roger, the younger ranger in the back. Where the hell is he? "Where's the new guy?" Dean shrugged. "Maybe he ran off when the fighting started?" he asked helpfully. "I mean, he didn't exactly sign up for this. I don't think most people would want to start a new job like this, to be honest." "No," Allie said, frowning. "He was next to me when the attack started. I saw him shooting. He had a 12-gauge Mossberg. It was so loud every time he fired it, my ears were ringing. And then, by the time that thing jumped on me, he wasn't there. Maybe he got dragged away? God, I hope not. I hope he just ran back to the station." She shook her head. "Calvin?" the ranger asked on the other end of the walkie-talkie. "Did we lose you?" I raised it to my lips, hesitantly. "I'm not sure how to say this," I said, "but I think Roger may be gone. I don't even know if he's still alive. You should call the police and get some search helicopters going." I didn't add, however, that the chances of any helicopter finding him, alive or dead, were slim. If those creatures had dragged him off, we might find bones, stripped of flesh, or maybe, more likely, nothing at all. "This was a total shit show," I said, once we were back at the station. A Lifestar helicopter had taken Antonio and Allie to the hospital to be stitched up and given shots for rabies and infection. I didn't really know Roger, as he was always quiet and had just started a couple weeks ago, but I felt a sense of guilt for him as well. Dean came towards me, putting his hand on my shoulder. "We can't give up," he said. "Your wife may still be alive." I nodded, staring off through the window at the dark forest outside. "I'm going back," I said. "Tonight. I don't have time to waste. I'll take a different trail. If my wife is alive, then the way to find her is out there. I know it. I think it's at that cabin." "Aren't there police guarding the cabin?" he asked. I nodded. "So they say," I said, bitterly. "I'm going." "I'll come with you," he said, looking determinedly at me. "Why in the world would you want to come with me? You realize I'll probably die, right?" He shrugged. I'm not so sure of that, he said, but maybe. We could all die tonight, I guess. I'm still coming, though. And let's bring more guns this time. I nodded, smiling slightly. We went to the armory. I still had my 20-gauge shotgun and my backpack with slugs and shells inside. I also grabbed 2 pistols, a Ruger Super Red Hawk and a Smith & Wesson Model 500. Dean grabbed a Judge, a pistol that fires shotgun shells, and a .50 Action Express. We filled our backpacks with more ammo, strapping the pistols to our belts. It all felt extremely heavy to me, and I knew it would slow us down. But I didn't want to risk running out of bullets so fast this time. We also each grabbed a large Bowie knife, strapping the sheaths next to the pistols. I put a few bottles of water in my pack, giving a few to Dean, and threw in some peanut butter and crackers for good measure. I wasn't expecting to be out long, after all. We set off, the night seeming darker than ever. Mostly, we walked in silence, listening to the chirping of bugs. My light illuminated an owl that flew down in the middle of the trail, looked at both of us with disdain, then flew off again. You know, owls are omens in many cultures, Dean said. Omens of what? I asked, genuinely curious. He shrugged. Depends, I guess. In Asia, sometimes they signify good fortune and luck. But the Native Americans and others often thought of them as omens of death or bad luck. Great, I said, frowning. Well, I don't believe in that crap anyways. I make my own luck. He laughed. That's a good mindset, if only it were true, he said. We got to the cabin in good time. Other than the owl, we saw nothing on the way. The forest seemed silent and sleeping, or perhaps just watching, wondering what we would do next. I saw the windowless cabin ahead, standing aloof in the silent, dark night. It looked eerie, the door standing open as if beckoning us inside. Splatters of dark, dried blood still showed on the threshold and the front of the door, contrasting heavily with the white wood in the LED light. Isn't there supposed to be police protection? I asked, confused. I thought they had a cop out here or something. That's what they told me, Dean said, frowning. He raised his gun, walking forwards slowly. This is the park ranger, Dean, identifying myself. Do not shoot. I repeat, we work for the park. Please respond if you can hear me. He yelled loudly. The echoes faded into the trees. But I heard nothing. I walked side by side with Dean, then started sprinting forwards towards the door. Something was wrong, and I knew it. I peered inside and saw the body of a police officer, crucified against the wall. Large nails were driven through his wrists, drops of fresh blood still falling quietly to the wooden floor below. His eyelids were missing, cut or bitten off, giving him a look of perpetual surprise and terror. He had been disemboweled, his intestines hanging down like the leaves of a weeping willow. And from behind us, I heard laughter. Turning around, I saw Roger, the new ranger, dressed in a black robe and surrounded by dozens of the thin, emaciated creatures. He smiled, his boyish blue eyes turning cold and insane as he showed all his teeth. My friends, you have come back, he said. Thank you for that. My creatures need to feed, and your bodies will make delicious meals for them. Why are you doing this? I asked him, stepping back and slowly flicking the safety off of my shotgun with my pointer finger. And where's Stacy? Roger laughed. Your wife is somewhere safe, I can assure you, he said, his face a mask of insanity and evil. She is being transformed. She is becoming something more than human, greater than humanity ever imagined. With my help, she will live forever. Would you like to join her? I'd rather die, I said, raising my shotgun and pointing it at his head. He smiled. If you kill me, your wife will die. I assure you, Roger said, pushing his blonde hair to the side. She will die slowly, probably starving. She is in a place no one will ever find her. Only I know where she is being held. But it is your choice. Do we not all have free will? The creatures around him stood as still as statues, each of their blood-red eyes focused directly on me. If I hadn't seen them move earlier, I might have thought they were simply grotesque Halloween decorations. They didn't even seem to breathe. And then I realized, perhaps they didn't. What are these things? I said, pointing to the blackened, emaciated bodies that surrounded him. Some sort of black magic? He shrugged. Black magic is just a word, my friend, he said. There is no such thing as white or black magic. There is only power, and those with the will to change the world. As a great man once said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I shook my head. I have no idea what that means, I said. Do what thou wilt, he said, his eyes blazing with intensity now. Do what you will. When God created the universe in his infinite energy and power, he willed it to be. In the space of a moment, it came out of the void. I, too, have a will. We are made in his image, after all, and my will has been honed and intensified, until soon I will approach the power of the angels, and one day, even of God himself. So, what's your actual plan here? I asked. You want to create a race of monsters that goes around killing anyone they want at random? You want to kidnap innocent people and subject them to God knows what kind of horrors? All because of your will? Yes, exactly, he said, his voice raising in excitement, a fanatical gleam shining in his eyes. And I make myself the ruler of all, starting with this infinitesimal state, and moving on to the country, and eventually, the world. Can you imagine what we could accomplish without nationalism separating people into competing groups? Without countries constantly fighting over resources? What if we had a leader with a true vision? One who could unify everyone and help to push humanity towards the next stage of its evolution. Perhaps even towards colonizing the rest of the galaxy. But it all starts here, with you and me. So I'll ask you, would you join me? I looked over at Dean, who stood close to me, looking pale and terrified. His eyes flicked from Roger to me, as if he were watching a sports game, rather than an insane spectacle of death and black magic. I'd rather die, I said, my heart pounding in my chest, my mouth going dry. Roger's face turned into a mask of fury as he screamed for his minions to attack. I fired the shotgun, but they swarmed in front of him, and the slug hit one of the burnt abominations in the chest instead. I swore, turning to run into the cabin. "Dean, let's go!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I looked back and saw him standing there, shell-shocked and vacant-looking. "Dean!" I said again, and his head snapped towards me. He began sprinting as the creatures closed in around him. I had already reached the cabin door and waited for him, breathing fast. I raised the shotgun and shot one of the creatures only a few feet behind Dean. The slug broke through its leg, sending splinters of bone and blue blood spurting into the earth below. Roger screamed in rage behind us, an incomprehensible roar of fury and madness. As if on cue, the creatures started screaming too. A shrill, maddening sound, like someone being burned alive. They didn't seem to need to breathe, and the screaming went on for an inhuman length of time. I pulled Dean into the cabin quickly, slamming the door shut. A blood-stained padlock hung from a nail on the left side of the door. Looking quickly down, I saw a metal ring connecting the door to the wall. I pushed all my body weight against the door and took the open padlock in my hands, feeling the cold metal and the sticky, congealed blood. A sense of revulsion and horror overtook me, but I brushed it aside. With fumbling fingers, I slipped the padlock shackle through the door's ring, but at that moment, a creature smashed into the other side, sending me sprawling on the ground. My shotgun went flying, sliding across the rough planks of the blood-stained floor and stopping beneath the crucified body of the cop. His intestines swayed back and forth from the force of the gun. The door flew open and I saw the leering faces and the red, bloody eyes of the abominations as they stared in, dripping long strands of saliva onto the dirt below. "Kill them all!" Roger shrieked in an insane voice, and the creatures rushed in. Dean began shooting, and I pulled out both my pistols, pressing the thumb levers on the holsters and releasing them. I started shooting madly, and their screams turned from fury to pain as they fell on the floor, their blue blood mixing with the red, coagulated stains below them. Within seconds, we had blocked the door with bodies. The cabin was small, barely even a room, though the wood was strong and fairly new, totally free from rot or holes. The only way in and out was through the door. With the narrow doorway blocked by a dozen blackened corpses, the rest of the creatures behind them tried to push through, but made no progress. One tried climbing over the pile of corpses, and I shot it in the head as soon as it peeked through. The rest didn't follow his example. I heard their high-pitched whines and screams outside, and Roger's much deeper one bellowing orders. "Get some dry leaves, twigs and logs," he said. "If they won't come out, we'll burn them out. No witnesses. no loose ends. He said this last part as if to himself, his voice slowing down and becoming reflective, almost meditative in its quality. I turned to Dean, terrified and exasperated. His face reflected the emotions I felt. I regretted ever coming out here. We would most likely die, and my wife would be left in the hands of that psychopath outside, unless the police made some sort of unlikely break in the case and found her. Well, Dean, I said, slowly and sadly, I think this is the end. Unless you have any plans, I sure don't. I guess we could start moving the corpses and try to fight our way out. That's probably what we'll have to do. Dean shrugged, his movements apathetic. He looked as if he also had given up hope. And then a miracle occurred. I heard a voice I had not heard in what seemed like eternity. It was the voice I had heard through my walkie-talkies, the one talking about dead stars. What had he said to me? As if in a flash, my subconscious repeated the strange words I had heard. I remembered, as if I were there, as if I had gone back in time and stood in the woods, calling for help, with a mutilated corpse walking up behind me.
Get out of there and never come back. That cabin is for the sinners, those who worship the dead stars, those who have offered their lives to the Ancient Ones.
The Ancient Ones? Yes, that is what it had said. That stuck with me for some reason. I thought of Roger and his bizarre ideas on will. It reminded me of Nietzsche or Hitler. Hadn't they made a movie about him called The Triumph of the Will? Roger clearly had an obsession with the power of the will. In fact, I thought perhaps his obsession had come from black magic and Aleister Crowley, but I couldn't be sure. These thoughts all flashed through my head in a fraction of a second, and I thought, for a moment, I understood something ineffable. Some way out of this madness. But then, it was gone, and I was just a scared man, sitting in a blood-soaked cabin, listening to an otherworldly voice.
You and your cult have trespassed on holy ground,
the voice said, booming and godlike. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from all around me and even inside the cabin itself. It shook the ground and sent the crucified body of the police officer swaying again, his disemboweled intestines slowly moving from side to side.
You have committed horrors and disrupted the peace of the dead. You and your creatures are doomed.
You have no power over me, Roger said, his voice seeming faint and almost childlike in comparison to the voice of the other. Come out here and try it. Don't hide. Let's see your true form. The voice laughed. Dean began moving some of the corpses, trying to look out the door. I got up and went to his side. I saw the creatures surrounding the cabin had gone. They stood in a circle around Roger. His white face was the only color, a contrast to the blackened bodies of his minions and the jet black robes that he wore. He looked like a dead star in infinite space, his skin lifeless and pale.
The Ancient Ones use you as a puppet,
the voice said. I peered around and saw Dean doing the same, but I could find no source for it.
I too have an army, but mine are not drawn from the dead or the despicable art of necromancy. I use the forest and its many secrets. And who do you think is the stronger, the dead, or those with a connection to the living and breathing holy ground of this place?
Roger's eyes widened as hundreds of animals came out of the woods, a stampede of fur and feathers. I saw bears rushing in the front on all fours, approaching the emaciated, blackened victims of Roger and standing on their black legs, roaring and clawing. They swiped at their chests and faces, leaving deep gouges before lunging for their throats, and with a quick side-to-side motion, ripping the heads clean off. Roger turned and began to run, his remaining minions following suit. The animals chased after them, and within a minute, everything had started to go silent again. We kept pulling bodies out of the doorway, and by the time we got outside, no one was left, except for some of the corpses of the monsters. We made it back to the cabin in record time, moving quickly with guns drawn. I saw police cars and FBI agents everywhere, and they started moving into the woods with searchlights and dogs. Antonio Brown was back, bandaged and looking haggard and pale, but otherwise okay. He came up to me and Dean. We knew it was Roger. We're looking for him now, he said. The FBI and state police just searched all known properties associated with him. We found the blood of your wife, Cal. I'm sorry. We didn't find a body, but it's a lot of blood. Too much for someone to lose and survive. His words stunned me into silence. I had held on to the glimmer of hope that Stacy was alive. That we would just need to capture Roger, and then we could find out where she was held prisoner. I started shaking, and almost collapsed, but Dean caught me. He pulled me over to a bench and sat me down. Take a minute, he said. Just breathe. I sat there for what seemed like hours, watching the police and FBI agents pass by, going into and out of the woods. After a few hours, a team came back. Antonio was outside, talking to the police chief of the town. The team went up to him. We found the body of Roger Gray, the police officer in charge said. It looks like an animal attack. There were all sorts of blackened corpses around him. We don't really know what they are. It looks like he dug them out of a graveyard and burned them for some reason. The whole scene is, well, it's bizarre. We don't know what to make of it. There were no animals around when we went, but the tracks look like hundreds of bears, deer, owls, crows, and others passed right through there and attacked him. He shook his head. I swear, this job gets weirder and weirder every day. I went home that night. Everywhere I looked, I saw traces of Stacy. In the bedsheets she had chosen, the pictures she hung on the wall, even the dishes she had washed a couple days ago, which seemed like years ago now. Little did I know, but I would see her again. My insomnia got worse after that night with Roger and the strange voice in the woods. I had always had trouble sleeping, but now I didn't sleep at all. I would sit up night after night, drinking scotch and watching the 24-hour news channel, or just there and stare out the window. And then, after a week, I saw something strange. It was Stacy, my wife. I would have recognized her anywhere, but at the same time, it wasn't her. She had the same eyes, yes, the same hair, even the same clothes as the last time I had seen her. But now, she was covered in blood and dragged one leg behind her, weeping and gnashing her teeth. I saw her lunge down and grab a raccoon from next to the garbage, biting its neck as it squealed and thrashed in her arms. After a few seconds, its thrashing died down and then stopped. She sucked the blood into her open mouth, her eyes shutting in pleasure. Then she dropped it, turned to me, and smiled. I couldn't believe my eyes. I ran outside, but by the time I got there, she was gone. Only a dead raccoon, with its neck broken, remained at my feet. I took a leave of absence from work and began to search the woods. It was the only place I could think of. The forest where all this strangeness had begun. My intuition guided me, and my heart told me that if I was going to find Stacy, or what was left of her, it would be in that forest. I would return home every night, disconsolate and broken-hearted. After a month of this, I returned home and turned on the news, pouring myself a shot of whiskey and sitting back in my recliner.
The corpses were found in a campsite next to Windermere Lake, within the Temple National Park,
the broadcaster said, and I sat up straight in my chair. That was where I worked. I knew exactly where Windermere Lake was. Hadn't I hiked it every day? The lake itself was only 3 miles from the cabin where this had all started. That cabin of horrors and blood.
They apparently had their throats mutilated, and the blood drained from their bodies,
the broadcaster continued.
Authorities are tight-lipped on the mutilations and murders, but one officer told our reporter that 8 people are now dead or missing. The governor has responded, saying that they will close down the park if...
I turned the TV off, getting up and going into my bedroom. I got dressed and put on my hiking shoes. After all, I now knew the reanimated corpse of my dead wife roamed the forest, attacking and killing innocent people. Roger was dead, but there was more work to do. I saw my wife's smiling face in my mind, and I remembered the way she smelled, like perfume and flowers. I quickly blinked back tears and grabbed my shotgun, strapping a pistol to my waist. No matter how long it took, I would bring her down, and hopefully free the forest of this evil. It's been 3 years now, and still I haven't had success. To this day, I still go out at night, roaming the trails. I found bodies, skinned alive with limbs twisted around tree branches, and campers with their faces eaten off, leaving just a mask of gore and bone behind. I'll never know if they're all from Stacy, or if something else lives there, but I have a mission, and I am determined to fulfill it. I know my wife's soul has moved on, and that something else has taken over Stacy's body. Whatever shell remains is just an extension of Roger's satanic magic. magic, his necromancy, and evil. And I won't stop hunting until I know she is at peace.